This is Humble Mind. How often do you get the chance to think about principles and systems within your business, especially those that pertain to delighting, attracting, and retaining customers? What about those that help you to determine when you're encountering resistance versus friction and the difference between the two? How about creating an agreement with how to have difficult conversations and not have that affect the core relationship? That's exactly what we spoke to Jermaine Edwards about. And in this episode of Humble Mind, you'll be diving into really, really fantastic, creative, and imaginative brain as he discusses some of the customer growth principles and the advantage that it gives you when it comes to dealing with customers, when it comes to repeating acts of success instead of keeping them random. This is Humble Mind. If you're curious about what we do and curious about our community, I'd suggest joining us at humblemind.co. Here's the conversation. Enjoy it. Obviously, I know Tracy knows Jermaine, and I've been following him for a while already now, but just for our listeners and for Sari and Carla who are on the call. So Jermaine is a customer strategist. He's an advisor. He's an award-winning author as well. He's a speaker and is the CEO of the Irreplaceable Advisory Group. And so Jermaine is on a mission to teach CEOs and customer leaders specifically how to build organizations that their customers never want to leave. So he's got a huge amount of experience in sales, leadership. He's run 6, or is it 7 companies, Jermaine? I'm sure he'll let us know.
It'll be 7 now.
It's 7 now.
Yeah.
Okay, amazing. He's a serial entrepreneur. And I've always found his insights and sort of imaginative thinking around building and scaling a business, but specifically around, the attention and the focus on customers and customer principles. Really interesting. And obviously a lot of other people have as well, which is why he's such a success. So welcome back to Humble Mind, Jermaine. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you. Absolutely. I'm humbled to be back again.
Yeah.
Indeed. Real pleasure.
Thanks,
real
man.
honor.
Yeah,
Indeed.
wonderful. Yeah. So you're obviously from the UK originally, but you're based in the US now. That's right?
Based in the US, absolutely. Yeah, I got, every story starts with a girl, and mine is no different. It's my wife. And so here I am, a year later with all our kids in the US, and it's been a journey. It really has been. I've always been an open book in regards to that journey. It's been tough, but actually tons of learning and new opportunities have presented itself right now, particularly in the last few weeks, which has caused me to be even more excited about 2024.
Okay. What's happened, if you don't mind me asking, in the last few weeks? What's caused the excitement for the year to come?
Yeah, well, 2 things, and I think I'll give you an exclusive here in the Humble Mind is, and Alex, we talked briefly about my desire to create a show.
Oh yeah,
a show that had a representation of the reflective work of what could be achieved with small business when they were truly customer centered. And so I was speaking to YouTube studios, now in contact with a few production houses, and we are not too far away from fully resourcing our first show, which will be a launch of a brand new YouTube channel, but actually almost like a syndicated omnibus that actually will have
amazing
a series of shows that will represent some of that stuff, which I will be the host. And so excited about that, and that's going to be really interesting.
Ah, fantastic. Okay, we did talk about it, but obviously new news for everyone else. And yeah, I'm really excited. Please make sure you drop us a link when that's ready to watch. When I send some support your way.
Real production. Absolutely. Not started production yet, but it will start in the new year. So yes, excited about that.
Fantastic. Almost like a dragon's den, but nicer and better.
I'm hoping so. Hoping to get my good side. Yes, indeed. So we'll see.
Yeah. So I'd love to start with kind of defining some of the stuff that we talked about last time, which was a lot around sort of the sorts of principles and the sorts of kind of guiding systems that help to establish, what would be a healthy kind of customer handling playbook, the philosophy, if you like,
Yeah.
behind
Yeah.
what drives good behavior around customer delight. And I know that there's the kind of thing that you can probably write 10 books about, but maybe just
Yes.
for some of the
Lots to talk
people,
about.
yeah, there's from some of the people listening for the first time and going through some of the replays on Humble Mind. And, if they hadn't listened to anything on this topic before, how would you kind of start and sort of define that, just to bring everyone into the conversation? How can we look at customer principles if we were looking at it for the first time?
Yeah, so I think it's important just to kind of define what principles are to start
Yeah.
with. So we're talking about really a framework of thinking that supports the approach to decision making and any defined actions that we take. And so if we think about principles as something that really is a lattice, it's a lattice network of connecting things that form our beliefs around something as well, but it also shapes how we do almost everything. And so when we consider really kind of the approach to any decision that we take in our business, what we're really relying on are a set of principles, set of defined thinking practices that we've had that begins to shape the way we approach particular tasks and circumstances. So an example might be is that you had an experience, let's just say in approaching hiring an employee. And that was maybe you had a negative experience before. So now you've inferred from that, there's a new principle that you take, which is always hire slow and fire fast. That is a principle.
Yeah.
And so you take that and that model of thinking, and it gets applied to the way you make decisions. Now, what's often the case is that with our customers, we are almost always making decisions for our customers without necessarily thinking about what principles are being applied to those circumstances that actually can give us higher likelihoods of success and confidence to make those decisions. And so what I've been much more curious about over the last few years, what are some of those principles that allow you to get access to different kinds of results that are far greater, far better, and more repeatable than any others?
Mm. Yeah, that's
And
brilliant.
so and that's kind of where we got to that. So that's principles in a general sense. Hopefully that makes sense as
Yeah,
I've
great,
communicated.
great. And I think what's so refreshing about that viewpoint is that when you explain it like that, it's easy to kind of see, well, yeah, that makes sense. The building blocks of what helps to produce good results, happy customers, improved retention, better sales, but also doing that consistently and repeatably, right? And that's often something I hear you talk about on your content, being able to kind of not just have
Yeah.
great principles that belong on a beautiful plaque, outside the office, but things that people live, right? Things that people do as a matter of course. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And so I just began to see this more and more often. And I'm not sure if anybody else has experienced this, but I called them what I called it some years back. Remember I was in a room with a client of mine, and they were just talking about a program that we'd run. It was really successful the year prior to that, but this year it really struggled. I was just so perplexed by it. I was like, really, we really spent a lot of time on that program, really putting this stuff together. And this person just spat out the word. It's like, and he said, it really feels like we're just having random acts of success.
Mm.
And I suddenly just stopped for a moment, and I said, that's exactly what it is. Like these random acts of success, these things that we have in our business. So, for example, I'll give you an example here, and I think almost all of us could experience this at some point. Is that you have certain relationships where things just move really easily, and you get certain results. And then all of a sudden, we begin to define the results of what we produce based on our best relationships, not based on the ones that aren't working.
Mm.
And so, what happens is what we miss is understanding the connecting correlative points that actually help all relationships to move in a healthy way and move forward. Rather than looking at one relationship and thinking, well, this one's working, therefore I must be good at it. Well, actually, that's very, very, that's not really true. It's not really good thinking to apply, but actually we do it all the time. And so what tends to happen is we disregard or we label clients that we can't get results with difficult, or they're just not as easy to deal with, or we segment them in certain ways, we put criteria around them to make it easier for us to work with those people that we figured something out with, when actually your relationships really haven't changed. What's happened is that you haven't defined or understood the principles that have made that possible. And so we refine. So what I've been much more curious about is what are the systems that support those principles, that help those things then to move so it doesn't become necessarily just repeatable for one moment, but reproducible anywhere in the business. And so it's moving them from principles into systems that organize and support all the activities that give you the kind of results that you can have across a larger percentage of your customers. And so I challenge almost every single business. I say, if you think you're getting results for your clients, and that's great, everybody gets results for their clients. But if you're not getting it with more than 20, 30, 40, 50% of your customers, then what you have is what I call random active success, a business that is good at repeating stuff in certain circumstances, but cannot reproduce it across the business.
It's such a great insight, because we often don't interrogate success in the same way we do with failure, or something that's that we're trying to get better at. We kind of, as soon as we sort of hit the mark in some way, it's like, well, you crossed the line, doesn't matter how you got there, let's just move on, right? But it's such a great way of sort of seeing, well, let's interrogate what's behind that and ultimately derive the principles in the system that helps to support that, to make it repeatable. Yeah, it's so interesting. We have an interesting psychology around success and what makes something successful, right? Sometimes our own denial drives that, or why we want to focus on, like you said, focus on the good things rather than only the bad things. Yeah, I'm not sure if you've picked up any insights over the years around, specifically working with leaders and sales leaders, customer success leaders, on what drives the mentality for them to not always interrogate the success. Have you found, is there kind of one or two common points of thinking there?
Yeah, there are tons of kind of heuristics or biases that we carry at different forms, at different levels in our organizations. In fact, there's a lot of work being done in the scientific field to begin to extrapolate this, because one of the realities in the scientific field here is that when you cannot reproduce something in the same way within the same conditions, it's called the replication crisis. It's what it's called. You can look at the replication crisis. It's simply it's an unable. But what tends to happen in business is when we can't replicate something, we tend to not necessarily evaluate, but we tend to work harder on it. Meaning it just doesn't work. We go, oh, we just needed to work harder on X. We need to change this process here, rather than saying, well, actually, is the foundation we're building this on even the right thing to build it on? The conditions that impact it. And so if I think about kind of some of the psychological principles that are out there, there are a number. Part of that is confirmation bias, which we know very well. But actually, there's also a really interesting theory called cognitive tunneling. I'm not sure if you've ever come across this particular phenomenon here, but so cognitive tunneling, what it explains here is that when you have mounds of data that come at you, or you have the ability to collect data, you have lots of data at you, what you do is that you will simplify it to the point in which you understand it, and then apply your own biases to justify it. So I'll give you an example of this. So let's just say that you are looking up references for a new product. And you're getting up all the data, all the specs for this particular product, and you begin to line it up. And you begin to line up all the data, and you see that it's moving in that direction to one particular area. However, on looking at that data, you start to see other people reference something else. Now, if you have what I call high degrees of influence to social proof, and some people do, and there are actually degradations of influence that people have. You can test this actually to see what influences you the most as an individual. You, even when you have the data, even when the data is conclusive that you should go for one thing, you'll be more swayed to go with the other piece because it validates and justifies the relationships you have with other people. It's kind of the social bias
Mm.
on that. So cognitive tunneling is when you get a lot of information, you cannot decide, and so you revert back to your biases or to the thing that influences you the most. And so we all have this to some degree. It's so interesting. I was looking at this myself with Amazon. I was making Amazon purchase. You know, when you look at the reviews and you look at how many 1 stars, 3 stars, 5 stars it
Yeah.
has. And what I noticed too much for myself is that if the 3-star rating is a double percentage point, I tend not to buy it. It's a weird thing.
Mm.
Like even if like it's the weirdest thing, but for some reason I tend to bought products that have a lower 3-star rating and a higher one. And I started to look at kind of why that was the case. I was like, well, why is that the case? It's because I thought, and again, this is again a
Mm.
heuristic or model
Mm.
here,
Mm.
is that as if the middle is descending to a 2 point. Again, it's all statistical kind of significance here. If
Yeah.
the middle descends to double percentage, it's usually in those circumstances that I have found is that there is something that hasn't been solved with the product yet.
Mm.
That's been my experience. Rather than looking at it individually as just that product, I started to apply these other things. And that became, even when all the data was conclusive, this is the best product to go after, I still deferred back to something that I had experienced before or to the opinions of other people in that circumstance. So it's kind of a long way of explaining some things here, but I wanted to give a picture here
Mm.
that at all times, the reason why we operate under the principles, why I encourage this systematic view here, is that it helps you in that moment to begin to ask a different question
Mm.
when otherwise you would have moved to a bias. And the question is not necessarily something that is always obvious and commonplace. The question is whether or not I should trust the thing in front of me.
Yeah.
And that's a really, really important because we carry these assumptions around this being good, this being not. But if you have some principles that helps you to discern where it is and what it is, and a system underneath it that moves you through a process that gives you a higher likelihood of chance of success, then the whole business can operate with greater
Yeah.
confidence. But oftentimes that isn't the case.
I suppose also just to add to that is that the system that you use with which to evaluate that also should be something that kind of catches you out when your own cognitive bias or your personal bias gets involved,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because that kind of thing might work on an individual basis, but if we're looking at amplifying the wins, if we're looking at ways to make things repeatable and not these random acts, then those kinds of things have to be rooted out, right? Even if you might have found a strange way of being able to confirm those biases on Amazon. I have similar things like that as well. I think we all have those little knickknacks and kind of mental little models where we're like, it's almost like when you're walking over tiles, you skip over the second one or every third one or whatever. Yeah, it's crazy, but it just sticks, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And then eventually you
Uh-huh.
create a narrative around it. I think we all do that. It's kind of funny, um, but um, but it's a great point and a great way to explain it. So when you come in and when you start to talk to some of these teams or customer success leaders in the businesses that you work with, and often quite big organizations, um, what are some of the common kind of areas of resistance that you often pick up? It might be a team resistance, it might be personally with a manager. I'm just interested in how you're able to bring this conversation to people where there's clearly a need to instill a sense of principles and systems. But often, people
Yeah.
have their way of working and they're not always going to be receptive to some guy coming in telling you need principles. Like, have there been moments of resistance or kinds of things that you often have to overcome before they start to go, actually, yeah, you're right?
All the time. Because what's interesting is that contrary to belief, I'm not necessarily always going into businesses that are in tremendous amounts of pain.
Sure.
And so they simply want to improve something that they believe they're really good at.
Mm.
In some ways, they want to take it to the next level, or some new interference has happened in the business that has caused them to dip in a certain performance area, and now they're wanting to solve for that again and go back into a different area. And so,
Yeah.
some of the biggest um, some of the biggest challenges that I probably get are in that, definitely in that mindset piece. It's like,
Mm.
oh, we really have really great relationships already. And so what I often try to do is not to disparage what they've achieved. That's not my goal here. It's simply to question whether or not they don't know how to achieve it again. And so I go, hey, great. I say, great. I say, so you're getting these particular results. I say, what percentage of customers are getting those kinds of results, with? Let's just have a look at it. And then what we tend to find is when we extrapolate to the across the business, we find that only a very, very small percentage of customers are getting those kinds of results, or they're getting those results with. And I'm going, okay, well, that's interesting. So, in this one example, I'll give a very real example. The company had close to, I think it's 200 plus customers that they were serving. 3% of those customers are driving about 80% of the revenue. And so we had a really interesting conversation. I'm like, okay, well, clearly you guys are getting some results with a handful of clients. Help me to understand what you believe to be true about the other 97%.
Mm.
And as they began to have this conversation around the 97%, what was really clear to me is that they had no clue whatsoever why their customers were buying for them in the first place.
Yeah.
And so very, very quickly, you can begin to extrapolate that simply from asking the questions. Even a simple question like this. So if I said to somebody, do you know what one of the single biggest levers in the business is for your customers buying from you every single year? What would that be? And some people say, oh, discount. Some people say this. I'm like, so okay, well, let's just test your theory. I'm not going to question it. Let's test it. How many customers do you apply a discount to that bought from you over the last 2-3 years? We look at it again. That's not what it is. Clearly, it's only 15% of those customers bought. So clearly that can't be it. Just have a look at something else. And very, very quickly, people realize, wow, we actually really don't know much about how our customers are growing at all. Like we think we do, but what we realize is that we haven't quite encapsulated in the business what actually makes the biggest difference. And so what I go in is helping to understand what makes the biggest difference, then how we extrapolate the principles from that, and then how we build the systems around to make it reproducible and repeatable across the business. That's a really quick example, but I'm often going in to challenge what they think they know just through a series of questions and just asking them to show me the data. You show it to me. I'm not gonna disprove it here. You show it to me. You tell me what it is that you think is working, and we'll look at it together.
It's a refreshing approach, and I think that it's probably the kind of thing that pretty much any business would benefit from doing, and they might not necessarily have to get someone like you involved necessarily. That's the kind of thing that anyone can really sit down
absolutely,
just put down on a piece of paper. What are the things that are driving the good things, and are those things that I can track down? Can I find out what is at the root of those things? It's a great inquiry.
Oh, without a doubt. And I think most people just aren't doing it. I think we're caught in a very much a top of the funnel kind of conversation. So when people talk about being customer centered or customer centric, what they're really talking about is how a customer feels about it. And that's great. I think customers still have to feel good about you. But if the business can't produce results on those feelings, then do those feelings still matter in the same way? It's not that they don't matter, but they matter in the same way. So an example of this is this. So I'll take this particular company, this manufacturing business that I'm currently speaking to at the moment. They have very good NPS scores.
Yeah.
I mean, probably the best in their market. Great customer satisfaction scores, but they still have to battle to keep their pricing at a certain level almost every single year when they are on renewal. They have pricing conversations all the time. They are currently being negotiated down by their customers. There seems to be a real disconnect between what the customer says they like and actually their own profitability. And so we had this really interesting conversation of understanding that what you want is to believe signals and not surveys.
Yeah.
And so and it's almost like this kind of behavior versus what's said versus what's behaved, right? And so the signals will tell you everything. So if your customer says you're the best thing since sliced bread, but actually they try to beat you down on price every single year, there's a big disconnect.
Yeah.
And so this is what they were seeing. And so the reason why those satisfaction scores were as high as they were, although it wasn't necessarily shown objectively through the data, is because they were pushovers. The customers could get pretty much what they wanted when they wanted just by saying we're just going to go somewhere else. And they kind of succumbed to it, gave them discounts, and over time, if you really looked extrapolated at the growth rate, growth was going up, but profitability was just shooting down every single year. And so they had a real problem here on how do we remarket something to business? How do we cause a client to be uncomfortable so that we can actually form a relationship that is truly equitable? And sometimes that is the case. Oftentimes people think that a customer has to be happy in order for you to be successful. That isn't the case. In fact, most relationships have to go through periods of unhappiness and uncomfortableness in order for it to be successful. And so we have to be able to embrace both of those things at the same time. And a lot of companies will sometimes put unrealistic expectations on their staff around a measure like happiness that is very difficult to achieve.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that makes sense, but I see it everywhere.
Absolutely. And I really want to just dig into that for a moment, because you're so right. Firstly, it's completely unsustainable and not possible. Even the best kind of charm offensive you could put on in any account manager, it's impossible to always have a 10 out of 10 happiness score with any customer across any span of time. But that's also the moments where the relationship element really comes into its fullest kind of value or use, because that is then what gets through those tough times, right? If the relationship is strong, if there's a sense of honesty, accountability, the right questions are being asked, the right approach to diagnosing the problem, then everything else can be going to complete pot. And I have seen this before in my own business, working with other businesses as well. That's where the relationship gets tested. And of course, it's seen through the right eyes, an opportunity to re-strengthen that. But of course, it's also easy, especially if you're not focusing on these principles, to sort of see that as the moment where we've lost it. It's all going down the hill, and now they're not happy, which means we're going to go bankrupt next week. So it's those sort of extremes, and not kind of seeing it with that kind of clarity.
Absolutely. And so this is the whole point about coming back to this principle piece of saying, okay, well, if we truly want to have great relationships with our customers, what would need to be true about our business or true about the relationship between us? And oftentimes the answer is not necessarily that that we're treating the customer better. Sometimes most companies are actually treating their customers reasonably well, contrary to belief. I think most customers, to some degree, at a reasonable standard, meaning most customers, to some degree, in a B2B relationship, I can speak to more often, more aptly, is a customer can pretty much get somebody on the phone. Now, whether or not the person is always helpful on the phone is a different story. But I'm talking about just access to help or to some sort of support is getting better. It's getting better all the time. It's not perfect, but it's getting better. I think what's happening is that we're missing a really important factor, which I call standards with your customers. And standards really are really different to expectations. Expectations, um, I'll give you the difference between standards and expectations.
Mm.
So standards is something that we both decide is something that is that we hold each other to, and it's something that is immovable to some degree,
Mm.
right? So this is the standard here. When we don't meet these standards, these things are irreconcilable to some degree.
Yeah.
Whereas in expectations, they actually can move based on context and circumstance.
Yeah.
And so we might start with an expectation that, hey, we're going to do these things together, but also something changes and we go, okay, the expectation now is different. I need you to do this instead of this. And expectations can actually be quite, can move in different places, but standards still stay the same.
Mm.
So a standard of how we communicate together will always be the standard, even when the expectations around what we do together changes.
Yeah.
And so what tends to happen is that we don't have standard conversations, but we do have expectation conversations.
Mm.
And so what can happen is, even in the shift in expectations, let's just say that a client asks for more from you, that's now a shift in expectation on you.
Yeah.
If they come back in unreasonable in expectation, what's happened is they violated the standard. But if you don't have that standard in the first place, you can't hold them to it.
Well said.
And so
Well said.
and so what tends to happen is that we fight for these expectations, but what we should be doing is defining standards first. And as expectations change, we simply hold people to a standard.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Instead of the expectation, which really could change at any moment. At
It could
any, yeah,
change,
which is what
absolutely.
happens. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where you tend to find disagreements really and resentment show up. So when we find somebody is really upset about something, a client, is usually when an expectation hasn't been met or value has been violated.
Mm.
And so if an expectation hasn't been met, it's because we haven't set the standard,
Mm.
not because the expectation hasn't been met. Because expectations, we're gonna disappoint people all the time.
Mm.
And particularly if an expectation has just come into bear. Let's say, for example, a client comes to you and says, "Oh, I need this tomorrow," and you say, "Well, you know, it's not going to be possible to do it tomorrow because of what you've asked for." Now the client's upset because,
Yeah.
like, man, I expected you guys to be able to turn this around 24 hours. Don't you guys have this? Don't you guys do this for a living? I've had these kinds of conversations
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah. 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 Sure.
So now you have to go back and apply a standard, which is,
Mm.
this is how we perform things as a business. Now, if you haven't set that up in advance with a client, if a client doesn't know how you work together, which is the standard of work together, how you work together, it's very difficult in the moment to do that.
Yeah. Exactly.
Very difficult in the moment to do that. So I often will talk to people about standards and expectations and being very, very different.
Is there a quick, just to loop on this? Is there a really quick sort of single tactic or something to be able to, especially if you're running a smaller business or perhaps you're dealing directly with the client? We've got a couple of entrepreneurs on the call, like Tracy as well,
Yeah.
who runs her own business. Is there something that you can do kind of upfront? I think we talked about this at one stage before, where you have a kind of an expectation manifesto, or I can't remember exactly what it was, but is there something that you can do which is
Yeah.
super easy, takes 10 minutes, and it helps to
Mhm.
set the course and set the tone for everything that's to come?
Yeah, I think two things you can do. So one is and that first conversation with the client, and this is going to sound really counterintuitive, is that what I often have is a conversation around how we disagree, how we decide, and how we
Mm.
actually delegate things. So what it looks like. So I often say up front is, hey, you know what, it's going to really, glad to be working together. Some things I've often found to be true about any relationship is the disagreement can take place. Would you agree? Absolutely. So I'd like to talk about just for a few minutes just how we disagree, so that if and when it occurs,
Mm.
we can have a conversation that allows both of us to move forward in a really amicable and respectful way. Would that be okay? Great. and we just talk for a few minutes. And there's a model around this, and maybe I'll just share it with you guys afterwards for free. You can download it and have a look at it. But there's a model for how you have that conversation, and typically it's this: is you're starting with a standard. You say, these are things between our businesses that when we do them, all conversations work out better. When we adhere to, all conversations work out better. So this is how we disagree. This is how we decide on things, and this is how we delegate things. Meaning, if you ask something from me, I'm going to ask something of you also, and we're going to have this exchange. We're respectful, mutual exchange. We're going to find ways ties it back. Excuse me, ties it back to the overall objective of where we're going. But these are some things that helps us in that moment. Really important for B2B business. Lots of clients, and onboarding lots of clients at different stages. If you're an entrepreneur and you're taking on 5-10 clients a month, you probably don't need to do this in the same kind of way. But if you are a business moving, you're growing, you have hundreds of customers, really important to have a process in which anybody in the business can recognize and have it, and you know how you disagree as a business, how you create standards and all those kinds of things. So that's the first thing. Understand, have that conversation around how you disagree, decide, and how you begin to delegate things. The other part to that is actually in the documentation of that. It's actually in a really simple statement, and I can't remember what I even called it right now, but I'll send it to you afterwards. Essentially, the statement says, hey, this is how we're working together. This is how we said we disagree. This is how we said we decide. This is the standard that we said is going to be willing for us to thrive in this relationship. And I get them to sign it. I get them to sign it and say, is this okay? Are you okay for us to kind of operate in this way together? So that when we approach each other, I can bring this up and wouldn't be a problem. I can say, hey, let's have a look at in which we said we wanted to work together. And now, if in that moment we decide together that we want to change that, that's absolutely fine. But let's just make sure that together we're deciding that we want to change that. But I get them to sign it up front. That's in every single group that I have. These are standards. This is how we disagree. This is how this way we delegate. This is how we decide. This is how we do these things. You go with it, great. Okay, that's how we do it. Whenever I have a conversation that requires something to move, to change, or where we have a disagreement, I always go back to that document. I say, man, it's tough that we're in a position right now. Let's just go back to what we said we would do. We're in a bit of a disagreement here. Let's approach this now from the place in which we said that we would. So respectfully, here's what it is, and then we go from there.
I love that, not only because it's so rational, but also because I think most importantly, it allows you and me, if we've got a conflict and I'm feeling a certain way and I need to get it off my chest, and perhaps you too, it allows us to create that space as a container to go and have that out, to go and look, this is something happened here. You asked me a question, I dropped the ball, but you also didn't give me that, so it kind of allows that to happen almost outside of the relationship, and
it acts as a mediator in the room.
Exactly. Yeah. Instead of the need to awkwardly have to cover it up and pretend we're not having a conflict, which then creates that extra stress on an account manager who's that sort of weak link in the chain now, because now I have to suddenly improvise and pretend like there's no conflict, or however else we might avoid it. Let's go, let's have it out, let's have that container, and then be able to agree to move on or move back into the original lane once we've done that. Super smart, super effective. We had last week someone who worked with Amazon for a couple of years, a South African guy. South Africans, we're all over. We're like cockroaches. And a really, really great guy. And he does sort of, he kind of goes in and he fixes businesses specifically to look at kind of what is the process you're following, and how can we fix things from a process perspective, and how can we get everyone else to drop their resistance to processes, new ones, or fixing them, and to kind of create operations as a mindset rather than this fixed kind of thing, what the tech team does, and we had a great conversation, and he talked a bit about some of the elements that Amazon kind of brings into this customer obsession mindset, right? It's famous now, and so I'm interested in just quickly on what your feedback is. You have any thoughts on sort of the Amazon way of how to do things? Because they've got definitely these sort of principles. They've got, their own principles firstly, but it seems to be something that's very much around kind of engineering the perfect experience for a customer, sort of no matter what. And the principles kind of almost seem sort of one-sided in a way like that, whereas the principles that you're advocating, granted it's different environments, but the principle thinking is where I'm at now. The values that you bring to a customer seems to be more about like, well, wait, we're two parties here, we're entering into an agreement, let's agree on what good looks like and then move forward. Whereas, what some might look at some of these other principles and sort of blind customer obsession might not deliver you away from tricky situations sometimes. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that. I just thought it would be interesting to kind of.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I've done some study on Amazon quite extensively, but I think it's important to recognize that the Amazon, the platform, the commercial public platform versus commercial enterprise, Amazon Enterprise and all the other functions of these businesses operate very, very differently.
Totally. Yeah.
And so when you have an e-commerce business, there is a certain lens that you are applying to that than an enterprise account, where you have account managers assigned to certain entities and where relationships have to be built on an individual and personalized level.
Yeah.
And so speaking to the platform, Amazon, or the e-commerce site, I think there's a lot that could be gleaned from that. One is that they're making some very important decisions about customers based on data and customer feedback. They're very good at enrolling feedback from customers. And there's a process that they apply to doing that I think is really effective. Maybe a part of a different conversation that we have, but they have a very, very good role of enrolling feedback. It's why Amazon wouldn't be as successful if it wasn't able to do that. Like if it had very few of its customers coming back to review things, it wouldn't be as successful because it wouldn't have the data necessary to make these other recommendations or even to figure out who's good and who isn't on the platform. What I can say, particularly from an Amazon perspective, is they are really good at thinking ahead for the customer. They primarily do that through the lens of friction to results. And so what I would often say with companies is that what we're not necessarily looking to do is remove resistance. There's a difference between resistance and friction. So resistance tends to be something that is implied as a force against something else that causes you to have to exert more effort to get to that thing. Whereas in friction tends to be something that is caused, that is unintentionally experienced, that causes discomfort in some way. And so I'm looking for where we apply whether that thing is resistance or friction. Like, is it applied resistance, meaning I'm putting it there intentionally in order to protect you from something, move you to something else, or to extrapolate something. Whereas this friction, like, we didn't expect this thing to be here. It's causing friction. It's causing to you to not get the thing that you want in the way in which we intended to. Therefore, we need to go remove it. And I think Amazon have a very, very clear way in which they identify resistance versus friction, and then they apply those things to make the experience better.
It's a great distinction. And once again, why I love kind of just roaming around your head on this is because it's such good distinctions to make. And I think often as busy customer leaders, we're in a role, we're kind of heads down all the time. You're running a business, you don't get the time or the leisure to be able to sort of like, hold on a minute, is this resistance? Is this friction? Is this pulling? Is this, pushing? Is this a situation where I could be having a kind of a side chat with my customer to manage their expectation? Or is it, it's not expectation at all? Is it a standard problem? So it's great to kind of have these sort of distinctions. Do you? Last time we spoke, we also spoke about right at the end about AI. AI. Here's the AI question. Brace yourself. Seatbelts on.
Indeed.
And you mentioned, or you, I think you quoted a friend, or I can't remember. I think it was a quote or something. But you said something to sort of the effect of, AI is something that can help you to automate the mundane and enable the exceptional, or something like that. I'm kind of paraphrasing.
Mm-hmm.
That was 6 months ago, when we were in the summer, and now we've kind of moved on, and the world of AI has sort of moved on in different ways as well. Do you have any updated thoughts on that? Do you still think that? Is there any other realizations or bits of thinking you've had since then?
Yeah, my brain's always worrying in that particular area. I think there's so much to be explored
Mm.
and discussed here. Yeah, the phrase that I'd mentioned was to automate the predictable and humanize the exceptional.
That's it. Yeah.
Um, and so yes, I think AI is doing a lot of the automated pieces here, call it back office, whatever you might call it, but it's taking away some of those mundane things that otherwise would have taken us away from being able to apply more to the human experience.
Mm.
So the question here now is, ethically for a lot of people, is what is human experience? And I think that now is being redefined in many ways with AI. And so if we're defining human experience as interactions between two human beings who can express similar things to each other because of the nature of what they are, then that's a very different thing.
Mm.
At the same time, what we're finding is that AI can express the nature of things of a human in different ways. Is that still a human experience?
Mm.
Um, and so we're in a really interesting place right now, where we're actually, and this I don't want this to sound um I'm trying to capture the words for it, but I'll give my phrase. Maybe it's the word that will come to mind here. But what I'm not trying to do in this statement here, and I hope this is being made clear, is to say that human interaction between human beings is not important.
Mm.
What I'm questioning here is whether or not human experiences are something we need humans for in all places of an experience with a human being. And
Mm.
and so my I'm moving to this place of saying I don't think it needs to actually always be a human that's enabling human experiences to happen.
Right.
And I think the definition of where those places, or how we define that, I think is, and it's something I've been thinking about quite a lot, because I'm being asked to get onto different kinds of boards now where we're talking about this and extrapolating from that experience piece. And so if experience really is designed to help somebody get a result,
Mm.
ideally, I mean, so my belief, and I think I've extrapolated, is that most people do not walk into an establishment hoping they get an experience unless the actual result is an experience. Like if I'm going to Disneyland, right, I expect that the I'm paying for an experience. If I go into my local coffee shop, I'm not hoping that I get an experience. I'm hoping that I can get in and out of that coffee shop in 15 minutes with my coffee.
Mm.
Therefore, I'm not ranking them on how I feel going in there or how I feel going out.
Mm. Mm.
And so in circumstances where our product isn't experience, our product is getting a result for a customer, whether or not AI can support in helping get that result by also express a human interaction, a human
Hmm.
experience, I should say, at the same time? I think the answer is yes.
Hmm.
And I'm seeing some semblances of where that could happen. I'm fascinated with the gaming industry. I used to be a secret gamer myself, super gamer.
A secret
I've been
gamer.
following a secret gamer, like all the gear,
Nice.
um, you can think about. And the gaming industry is really fascinating case study. I actually put out a post last week around a company called Unreal Engine, been around for a few
I
years,
saw that. Yeah.
and essentially and this has been going on for a couple of years, but they've been playing with, not just them but other companies too, but this is more explicit for them, giving, I guess, non-playable characters or just fictional characters, quote unquote, experiences and information so they can interact with you outside of the story. So, an example, I could ask somebody inside the game, "Hey, how was breakfast?" And AI will go, "Oh, it was good. I had eggs and toast."
Hmm.
Um, Now, that's a really interesting thing for a gamer, because typically the game is, I go and accomplish X. I speak to some people who are non-playable characters, and they point me in a direction that I need to go. I'm collecting information, and that's part of the experience. But
Hmm.
now the experience inside the game is, I can actually just walk around and have conversations with random non-playable characters as if I was on the street with somebody else.
Yeah.
You wouldn't believe the kind of reception it's getting. I mean, absolutely phenomenal reception. People are loving it. Is it because the story inside the story for the game is that I get to create something that is mine. I get to ask the questions that are
Yeah.
important to me. Now, what does this mean? Why am I even raising that as an example? Well, because I think expectations are changing.
Hmm.
I think for some reason we're not solving for the customer that's 10 years from now. And I think I'm recommending certain things to certain companies that they wouldn't have ever heard 5 years ago,
Hmm.
or they weren't even seen in it show up in the surveys with their customers 5 years ago, but it's showing up today. And so I think we need to be open to what the engagement looks
Yes.
like with AI, with all the ethical and corresponding thinking that needs to be done. But I think it's important that we understand that this is not going back in the bottle.
Yeah. Definitely. The genie, right? The genie's out.
It's
Yeah.
not. Absolutely. Pandora's open. Yes, it's not going back in the bottle. And at the same time, we also have to ask some really, really important questions, like what is
Mm.
human experience? What is a human experience? Is a viable question.
Mm.
Um, and what is it we feel we're trying to create
Mm.
with that? So if that when somebody says, it's so interesting when somebody says, "I want to speak to a real person," what are they really telling
Yeah.
you? What are they really saying? What they're actually telling you is that the current engagement I have right now with this other technology does not simulate the experience I need to get my needs met.
Yeah.
That's it. They don't necessarily need you as a person to be, because sometimes speaking to other people sucks.
Mm. Yeah.
And there's some government institutions that could deal with some AI NPCs answering the phones other than their own people.
Yeah.
Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, so it's a really interesting conversation.
It's it's a great piece of thinking because it leads to big questions, and big questions require us to then either revise or create new principles. because then that
Yeah.
helps us to dictate, well, what do we then do? Principles are great for showing us kind of what we need to do based on knowledge or experience or data that might have happened in the past. If something like this resembles, what you're experiencing now, here are some guides on how to handle that, right? But now we're kind of entering some totally sort of charted territory, where now we're needing to say, well, is a human necessary in creating an experience? Or if the experience, or if the product isn't the experience itself, like you said, do we need a human there? Do I need a barista in front of me to hand me the coffee? I just want to get my coffee and out. I'm not looking for a great conversation or philosophy. I just want to get my stuff done. And so then that prompts us to kind of rethink it, especially if I think some of these things are habitual, right? We get used to those experiences, but they might not be essential to what we're there for. You might like coming to that coffee shop because you get a bit of conversation, you enjoy the energy of everyone there, or the music or something, but at the same time I'm just there for the coffee. But at the same time, it's not like that's not important, because I'm still going there for
Yeah,
that
that's it.
vibe. There could be 5 other shops next door and I'm not going there. So it's tough, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of have to kind of look at the case, like what are we solving for? What are we trying to create here?
Yeah.
Because that's so interesting. Because I know some people locally who run coffee shops, and one thing that they hate are people coming in, buying a drink, and sitting there for 2-3 hours on a laptop. It's one of their banes.
Yeah. Classic. Yeah.
And so here's what's interesting. Is that I was just brainstorming stuff with them. These are people that I know. I was brainstorming. I say, well, okay, well, why don't you just make it a game? So for example, let's just say that in your things you have on your table, like a flashlight or something. And so for every hour, somebody has to rotate a table. You have to change tables, or actually, that light flashes off, and so you have. I mean, there's so many different things that you gamify the experience, so that people who are there almost get a ticket. So you ask somebody, "Hey, are you going to be here for a little while? Because we actually have like a raffle that we're doing, or you're going to be here for a while." Or just, there's so many ways in which you can begin to look at it differently from more of a positive lens. And again, that's a human interaction. Now you're imposing a human experience in order to grow the value of a single customer in that moment. So you want more transactions with that individual. So somebody comes in with a laptop, they're all set up. They've got their $10 to pay for that one cup, and they're going to be there for 3 hours. That is a cue to you to ask some questions and go, "Hey, you're going to be here for us for a while? If so, we'd love for you to participate in X with us," and so forth. Or you have dedicated spaces just for a laptop and a drink. So rather than somebody sit anywhere, you say, "Hey, we got a special place for laptops and a drink in that space. Anywhere else is for X, Y, Z," and that's perfectly fine.
It relates really well to what we're talking about, because instead of just getting pissed off with a customer in the moment, like, you're here all day and you just spent $8 on a cappuccino, rather, change the principle, change the way you deal with them. Okay, let's introduce a different experience, and then maybe that will change it, and not only make us happier, but them happier. They'll keep coming back, and they'll maybe even spend more. So it's a great way to kind of see, the long-term opportunity in the short-term situation, I suppose, right?
Yeah, indeed. So lots of interesting thought experiments there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I'd love to open it up. Just I know that Carla had a question. I'm not sure if she's still with us. She mentioned she had to step away for a moment, but she had a hand up. Otherwise, Carla, can you hear us? If so, feel free to come back on. But Sari or Tracy, if you've got any questions, any comments. Tracy, I know for you're feeling a bit under the weather, so feel free to put something in the chat if you like. Otherwise, happy to hear from you if you like. But anything that caught your attention in the conversation so far?
We covered quite a bit, I know.
Yeah, we did. Okay, you got to go another. Okay, no worries. Thanks, Tracy. Yeah. So maybe just to to kind of there we go, Carla. Hey, did you want to just
Hi.
yeah, hey.
Sorry, I had to step away for a minute.
No worries. Yeah, you had your hand up a couple minutes ago. You wanted to mention something.
Oh, I did. It was just around when you're talking about the coffee shop and human interaction, and if you don't think it's valid in some situations. But I kind of wanted to challenge that a little bit because I think it is valid. So when you go to a coffee shop, they do kind of give you an experience there. They have the dimmer lighting, they have the soft music, they have like the good smell, the coffee smells and everything in there. So I think that's all part of that experience as
Mm,
well. So
yeah.
I think even in cases where you don't think that there's necessarily an experience around it, there really is if you look at the subtle kind of hints. And I think it's more subliminal than like physical human interaction, but I think it's still there.
Awesome. No, thanks for that. Yeah, I'd agree with part of that, Carla. I think part of the conversation that led to that some comments around that was whether or not people are going into a building expecting an experience rather than a specific result.
Mm.
So if I walk into a coffee shop, what I'm not necessarily thinking about is I hope they have dim lighting and a great barista at the end of the conversation. They're thinking, I just want to get my coffee and come out in 15 minutes. So in an interaction, you can choose as an organization to elevate that exchange. But if they don't get the result that they want, let's just say it's a great experience, the lights are dim, but it actually takes them 30 minutes to get a coffee.
Mm.
All of a sudden, none of those things really matter because now I'm pissed because I wanted to be out in 15 minutes. And so it's understanding what result are we producing for the people coming inside. Now we can choose to elevate that experience through all the things that you've mentioned. I agree with it, actually. I think the human interaction works very well with a coffee shop. But it's whether or not the expectation of the result with the person is actually what it is. Now, Starbucks is very, very clear. They want you to know your name and that you're known by name coming in. And that in that exchange, they're taught how to have conversations with individuals. That's not the same for every single coffee shop that you walk into. And so it's holding that in mind. First of all, what result we're producing, and then if we do want to elevate the exchange, what is most helpful to producing or elevating that result? That's kind of where I was going with that.
Mm.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, not a problem at all. Thanks for the question. That's awesome. Yeah, thank you.
Before we wrap up, I wanted to see, Jermaine, if there's one actionable tip that someone listening to the end of this session, the end of this podcast, that they could implement like right away, in line with kind of some of the principle thinking that we've been talking about for the last while.
Mm-hmm.
How to approach situations rationally, how to make agreements, conscious agreements with clients, those sorts of things. They take time and they require a variety of different principles to be at play. But is there a sort of an immediate starting point that I could jump in with tomorrow on my business in the way I handle my clients? What's the easy sort of first actionable thing I could get going with?
Yeah, so I'd say just pick a result that you want most with a client. Pick a result that you may have got last month, last week, last year, and begin to ask yourself the question: how reproducible is this?
Hmm.
That's it. Is it is is this going to 10, 20% of our customers? Are we experiencing that? Is it 30%, 40%? And just begin to ask the questions: what do we believe is making the difference here? What do we believe is holding us back from this being more reproducible in other areas? So that's where I'd say begin. Just start with the result, pick something that's there. How reproducible is it? And begin to ask some questions around that.
That's great. Yeah, yeah, and it gets you into the kind of the mode of thinking, which is to sort of you know less of the embracing of the kind of the randomness, the random acts of success, but rather reverse engineer something and kind of be intentional. Cool. That's where we want to go. What can we do to
Exactly.
influence these behaviors so that we're more likely to reach that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And starting from there is really, really simple. I'm going to have actually in the new year, January, a scorecard which really begins to help individual companies assess their maturity of their principles and systems
Mm.
around the results in their business. And so that will be arriving in January. So people can take an assessment or questionnaire around that to help them really move that first stage forward.
Fantastic. Please share that with us when that's ready. Between that and your new YouTube show, we're going to be lucky if we see you again, Jermaine. The big lights are going to get you. That's awesome. Well, cool. Yeah, thank you so much for the chat. Really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed diving deep into some of this kind of the thinking, or rather, actually, it feels like it's less than diving deep. It kind of feels like rather coming up above ground and sort of just having that 50,000 foot view, that perspective, which I think is just priceless. So it's really, really great conversation. Thank you. Thanks for jumping on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, they're glad to be here. Hopefully it kind of helps the audience and other people who do choose to listen in later on.
Thanks for listening to this session with Jermaine Edwards on Humble Mind. Once again, if you're curious about our community and want to take a closer look at what we do and how we invest and learn by doing and getting to know each other, in sharing perspectives and unpacking what we learn and what we also unlearn, check us out, humblemind.co. Until next time.